What's up, everybody? Matt Gajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel, talking some college football DFS ahead of week 6, the main slate on DraftKings. We're talking Saturday. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks, and if you've never heard of Prize Picks, they're daily prop-based contests. There's no sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You make lineups of up to 5 players where you can 10 extra entry fee, and you can do this across sports. You can mix lineups with college football, with NFL, with baseball, whatever it is you know and love. And if you click the link in the video description below, you are going to get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum and up to a $100 match deposit bonus when you sign up and make your first deposit with Prize Picks. Again, click the link in the video description below to take advantage. All right, let's dive into this. We'll bring you behind the glass with our player usage tool. We've got 14 games, so we will get right into this. Last thing, I am battling some allergies, guys, so bear with me here. Can barely breathe through my nose. It's been tough. If you've seen the betting videos, you know this already. All right, so one thing I changed on the back end is the pass rate up here at the top, right to the left of that, seconds per play. This is where plays per game was. So plays per game, that can be a little misleading if your team just like got into one shootout or something. Seconds per play really tries to evaluate the pace of play for these teams. So for reference, it's a rank 1 through 131. Michigan is ranked 118th in seconds per play. Indiana's ranked first. So, I mean, that tells you these teams are playing at vastly different paces. And it's just a way to encapsulate speed. The rest is the same. OL, that's sacks allowed. DL, sacks generated. Your Vegas data, passing yards and rushing yards allowed per game, and then on a per attempt basis to try to really gauge what these teams are doing. First game, let's dive in. We have Michigan taking on Indiana, 22.5 point spread here. 58 total is decent. Michigan has a solid implied team total, so right away they're a team that looks pretty good here. JJ McCarthy hasn't really been let loose, and I don't really expect this outside of maybe a shootout, which doesn't project to be the case here, but the efficiency has been pretty good for McCarthy. If he ever gets more attempts, he should be solid. But they're not running him, just 64 yards in the year. He's just a game manager right now. Really hard to target him, even in a good matchup against Indiana. There's better price-adjusted plays. The backfield, however, Blake Corum has a monstrous workload. He's averaging 19.2 touches per game. He's seen 19 carries in back-to-back games. 31 touches in their last game. My goodness, Blake Corum, he's on fire right now. Donovan Edwards, only 5 carries in his return from injury. He did see 5 targets, so 10 total touches. Maybe Edwards is the pure pass catching back here, but this should still be skewed in favor of Corum. He's an expensive play, but one you can get to nonetheless. The receiving game, like McCarthy at the top, it's going to be tough for consistency among these guys like Ronnie Bell, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson. These are the top 3 you want to get to. Ronnie Bell leads the group. He's coming off that season-ending injury, but it's still tough to play any of them. And even like Roman Wilson, 52% of the routes in back-to-back weeks. That's not going to cut it. Cornelius Johnson's been a little better than that. He's at a 70% route rate, but he's 4th on the team in targets. Even tight end Luke Schoonmaker at 3,400. The targets have been volatile with him. So it's tough to play any of these pass catchers, honestly, until games get more competitive. I'll take a few shots here and there because of the team total, but not much to see. On Indiana, Connor Bazelak's the QB. He's averaging 279 yards per game, but he has negative 70 rushing yards, so he's highly dependent on 300-yard bonuses, which are few and far between against these elite opponents. Not really too much to consider here. The run game is a timeshare now. Thought Sean Shevers might take this over, but Josh Henderson and him are in a full timeshare. It's not one to really consider. In the receiving room, Cam Camper was sick last game. He's reportedly a game-time decision here. He's averaging 15 targets per game, so he's in play if he's active. We just won't have that information until a little closer to game time. DJ Matthews, he's the other receiver who's game-time decision. He's dealing with an injury. I would rather play Camper than Matthews straight up, but if Camper's out, Matthews plays, then you'd have to consider him. Outside of that, Emery Simmons looks like the wide receiver 3 tentatively. When everyone's healthy, it's a rotation. But him and Anderson Kobe had a full route share last week without Camper and Matthews. I would expect everyone healthy, this to be a rotation between them two for the wide receiver 3. Then AJ Barner's the tight end, 83% route share for him. Only 24 targets, 4.8 per game. I think we could do better, but you're looking for a stone punt. Barner kind of fits the mold. Tennessee LSU, 3-point spread. in favor of Tennessee, 65 total. A really good total. Excuse me, man. These allergies are killing me. It's a good game environment to target. Hendon Hooker's 8,100, but he's really mobile here, 175 yards on the ground for him this year. He's averaging 298 as a passer in just 28 attempts, so hyper efficient. And this is one of the competitive game environments where we can unload with Hooker. They don't have Cedric Tillman. He's injured, but Jalen Hyatt is a solid replacement, well above average in terms of yards per route run. So Hyatt, I think, is an expensive guy to get to. Brew McCoy has not been efficient at all, but he's playing a lot. He should work into a larger role at the mid-price range. I think he's a solid option for stacking with Hooker. And then Ramel Keaton has come up and played the full-time wide receiver 3 without Hyatt. I think there is some volatility here, but he's the favorite to do this, and he played well enough to retain this job. I think it's Ramel Keaton as the 3 at 3,800. He would be the guy I look to in punt situations. And then tight end is a pure rotation between Fant and Jacob Warren. I'm probably not getting to either of those guys. In the backfield, Jabari Small came back from injury, and he went right back to leading a timeshare with Jalen Wright. It's like a 70-30 split, 60-40 split in Small's favor. Small ended up touching the ball 22 times, while Jalen Wright had just 10 carries. So you can see, even though Jalen Wright had an awesome game when Small got hurt, they did not reward him. They went right back to Jabari Small when they're fully healthy. And I think Jabari Small and Jalen Warren are always going to be good GPP plays because of their attachment to an elite Tennessee offense. On the other side, Jaden Daniels has been banged up, but he's going to play in this game. Their coaching staff's been pressuring him to throw the ball downfield more instead of just scrambling every chance he can possibly get. But when he's scrambling, he's really good for DFS. 321 yards on the ground this year. He's only averaging 183 through the air, but not all their games have been competitive. I would expect this number to rise, especially against Tennessee, who's been getting gashed in the secondary. They've just been straight up winning track meets, and this should be the same with a 65 total. So Daniels, he's interesting. Last thing I'll say is he's dealing with an injury. Had an MRI on Monday or Sunday. Don't remember the exact day, but it's a lower body injury that might compromise him. We don't know, so take that with a grain of salt, but just worth noting. In the backfield, Josh Williams took over what seems to be the lead back role. This has been volatile on a week-to-week basis, but 17 carries for Williams. The next highest was Josh Emery at 8. Williams is the stone minimum. I think he's actually going to pop this week in projections. He had 19 touches in their last game. Like, he was heavily involved, and he played well enough, I think, to retain this. The only issue is they're still underdogs, and Emery had 10 touches himself. So does this flip-flop at any point in the season? It's possible. In the receiver room, this has been a pretty brutal unit for LSU, partially on Daniels' shoulders, but Malik Neighbors is the one right now. He leads the team with 6.4 targets per game. Their tight end, Mason Taylor, has actually been the next most involved, 4.6 per game. They did have Kayshon Boutte miss a game with the birth of his child, and he's still playing a majority of the routes. You know, like in their last game specifically, Mason Taylor was at 92% of the routes as the tight end, and then Neighbors and Boutte were both at 71%. That was the highest mark among the receivers here. And then they rotate a bunch of guys after that. Brian Thomas, Dre Jenkins, Jack Beck, even Kyron Lacey and Chris Hinton. These guys all rotate on and off the field. Boutte is cheap enough still where I think you could play him. But, man, instead of playing an LSU receiver, I might just play Mason Taylor at the stone min at tight end. He had 7 targets in their last game. We know Boutte has the upside, and he's cheap enough to get to. But, man, he's been horrific this year. He doesn't even have 100 yards receiving, averaging 24 yards per game. It's rough out there on these Boutte streets. Texas, Oklahoma. 7-point spread in favor of Texas. That's because of the Dylan Gabriel injury. 65.5 total, so still really good. Quinn Ewers expected to make his return. Labeled a somewhat dual threat type quarterback coming out of high school. He took 1 sack this year. That's his only attempt on the ground. So I think he's a little more mobile than that number indicates. And he's awesome as a passer, albeit in a small sample. And he only played part of a game, so his numbers that are reflected on the screen aren't really reflective of his upside. He was dicing up an elite Alabama secondary before going down with injury and an elite Alabama pass rush. Ewers is a GPP play at this price based on the unknowns and monster total this game has. He's easy to stack too. Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, tight end Jatavian Sanders are the main pass catchers in the offense. They rotate outside of that. I'm looking to get to really all of these guys. Worthy at the top, he's averaging 7.6 targets per game, nearly 70 yards. And then Jatavian Sanders is your punt. 4.8 targets per game for him, 42 yards. That's really efficient. Whittington kind of in that middle ground where I'd probably just rather spend up for Worthy, but he's viable too. In the backfield, Bijan, he's 9K, which is a lot to pay for a guy averaging 20 touches per game, but he's still averaging over 100 yards on the ground. He's an excellent receiver. He's averaging another 37.5 yards there. So Bijan, if you can afford him, is fine. This is, in my opinion, so this is a strategy type question. People love to pay up for these expensive backs when you can get 90, 95% of the workload at a cheaper price. So like last week, and this is a little bit marred because Muhammad Ibrahim didn't play, but like Ibrahim was heavily owned and he was like a 9K plus running back. I know the matchup was solid, but Minnesota lost the game, one. That's always a risk. And two, like we don't even know that he has that workload locked in. And even if he does, even if he gets 30 carries, you can find 20, 25 below 7K, around 7K. So that's generally my philosophy with these 9K backs. Same thing with like Braylon Allen last week, but a lot of people play these 9K guys is the last thing I'll say. But if you can find the salary, I think Bijan is worth it. It's just you're dealing with opportunity cost. Oklahoma, I'm not playing Davis Beville. He's 7,900 is egregious for him. He's straight up not a good quarterback. So can you play his pass catchers? I think Beville's insertion into the offense renders Marvin Mims volatile. He's too expensive. Jalil Farouk's averaging 4.5 targets per game. Theo Weiss is at 3.8. He lost a lot of playing time last week too. I think that's a concern moving forward for him. I'm going to pull up the routes now, but just when I was projecting the game, I saw that he was down at a 49% route share, and that coincided with Drake Stoops at 30%, and then you had Jaden Gibson at 40%. It's a rotation at wide receiver 3, and then tight end Braden Willis. His routes also dropped to 45.5%. While Daniel Parker's rose up to 57%, really high there. It's a rotation, pretty nasty situation. And then at running back, what is Oklahoma doing? Well, Marcus Major didn't play last week. They actually had Javonte Barnes out carry Eric Gray. Now, Eric Gray still had 2 targets in the pass game. So this is a near 50-50 committee, but it's devolving into a committee nonetheless. I'm almost entirely out on Oklahoma this week with the injury. Arkansas and Mississippi State, another QB injury. KJ Jefferson. Sam Pittman's kind of playing coy, suggesting to us that he might play. I'd be shocked if he does. It's a head injury for Jefferson. If he does play, he's really mobile, and this is a better matchup than what he faced last week, but still, Mississippi State's a very good defense. Jefferson's averaging 220 passing yards per game. He has 312 rushing yards. Just doesn't have the same upside without Treylon Burks, so he's tough to play. There's better options that aren't hurt right now. In the run game, Raheem Sanders still out carrying backups. He had 22 carries last week. AJ Green, 5. Dominique Johnson, 2. It's a timeshare, but Raheem Sanders is still very firmly ahead of this timeshare. He's a guy that has touched the ball 23.4 times per game. He touched the ball 24 times last game. He's the leader of this backfield. I think he's still viable because Arkansas has an excellent rushing attack. And now you're removing potentially a ton of designed rush attempts from Jefferson. In the last 4 games, Jefferson had 17 rushes, 6 rushes, 12 rushes, 9 rushes. Those are all designed. If he's gone, Cade Fortin is not mobile. Maybe Malik Hornsby plays a little bit. He's more mobile, but they've been using him at receiver. I don't think this is a great situation outside of Raheem Sanders. And then in the pass game, last year where we got all the production was there was a 30% plus target share funneled to Burks. This is really run-heavy offense. They only pass 34% of the time. If that target share is not funneled to one guy, which it's not this year, you're dealing with a really volatile situation. I'll say Jaden Hazelwood and Matt Landers are the top 2. Matt Landers averages 5.4 targets per game. I'd rather play him at 3.5K than go up and play Hazelwood at 6.6, who's averaging just 6.2 targets per game. Less than 1 target per game separates them. Give me Landers. Mississippi State, they run that Mike Leach air raid. Will Rogers is averaging 342 yards per game. He's just backdooring his way to 300 yards more times than not. Not a rusher, so he needs that, but he's in play at 7,700. More of a middling option, but I think he's fine. There's no really evaluating this receiving game right now. Like their routes are all over the board, week in, week out. No consistency to them. I'll say Ra Thomas has been the best receiver on the team, but you look at Ra Thomas, he hasn't eclipsed 55% of the routes in any game. He has a 46% route share on the year. Like for a 6,100 receiver, you're going to need more consistency than that. If I'm playing anyone on this team, I'd rather just go down and punt with Jaden Wally, Jameer Calvin, Austin Williams, Lydetrick Griffin. Like those guys all have similar route shares to Ra Thomas, but Honestly, ducking has the highest. Unfortunately, his 69% route share is plummeting. He went from 88% to 74% to 59% to 44%. Nobody last week had more than 53% of the routes. That was Trick Griffin and Jaden Wally. Just a complete rotation here. The same at running back, 50-50 rotation between Joquavius, Marks, Dylan Johnson. Johnson is a slight lead over Marks, but pure rotation here. Missouri, Florida, 10.5 point spread in favor of the Gators, 55.5 total. Brady Cook is mobile, 147 yards on the ground for him, but just 202 passing yards per game. There's better options than Brady Cook. The backfield's a pure timeshare between Nathaniel Pete and Cody Schrader. It's ping pong back and forth between them, but Pete's held a slight advantage lately. Don't think he retains it, though. Schrader's been more efficient than Pete on less volume. And then in the receiving game, they're sort of condensing things a little bit here. Luther Burden's going to play no matter what. He's their 5-star freshman. But then Barrett Bannister, 81% of the routes. Toski Dove, 72%. Dominic Lovett plummeted to 55.5%. But he still leads the team in receiving yards by far, 456. Second is Bannister at 432. Luther Burden has been terrible on his volume. He has just 111 yards on 27 targets, 5.6 per game. He's too expensive for his role. I'd rather play Bannister or Lovett, but I'm not playing anyone on Mizzou. Florida. We know the dual threat ability is there for Anthony Richardson, but they just don't use it enough. Like last 4 games now, he's reportedly been banged up. Here are his designed runs. 1, 5, 13, 1. One design rushing attempt is not going to get it done for a quarterback who has difficulty throwing the ball. He's averaging 223 passing yards per game. He has 241 rushing yards. Again, that's about 50 per game, a little bit more than that. Richardson, he needs more rushing to pay off this salary. Now he has that upside, so he's playable in tournaments, but man, I wish the volume was better, to be honest with you. The running backs, 3-way committee between Naquan Wright, Montrell Johnson, Trevor Etienne. Not much to see here. Very little separates them there. The receiving game, you're still looking at Justin Shorter and Xavier Henderson is the 1, the 2, and then Ricky Pearsall's the 3. Routes there have been fairly consistent overall for the most part. On the back end, it's tough to evaluate their last game because they played Eastern Washington. But prior to that, Shorter and Henderson, full route share. Pearsall's is growing. He was back up at 79% last week. That's positive. Tight end is a rotation between Zipperer and Zanders. I'm going to try to get Pearsall. I think he's the best receiver in this room. And he's 4,700. The only other thing I'll say is Justin Shorter, he actually leads the team in receiving yards and targets. So 4K for him. He's solid as well. TCU taking on Kansas. Game of the week. Game day is here. TCU is a 7-point favorite, and TCU is humming on offense. Excellent through the air, excellent on the ground. Max Duggan is still too cheap. He's averaging nearly 250 passing yards, 149 on the ground. He went over 100 yards rushing last week. We know he's mobile. He was in a timeshare with Chandler Morris to start the year. That's gone. It's Duggan's job. He's still too cheap at 7,200. He's an easy evaluation. The backfield, it's a timeshare. It's Kendry Miller, Amari Demercado. You'll see some Amani Bailey and Trent Battle and Corey Wren once in a while, but Kendry Miller handles most. He's hyper efficient, 96 yards per game. I think he's playable in tournaments. Demercado is a stone min play to maybe target, but again, there's a couple of those guys on the slate. I'm not sure if you need to. Receiver, it's a chance to maybe buy low on Quentin Johnson, who's been objectively terrible this year. 5.3 targets per game, 28.5 yards. He hasn't been the most involved, but I mean, like Tay Barber and Darius Davis are running laps around Quentin Johnson right now. He needs to play better if he's going to live up to that pedigree of being an NFL caliber receiver. Fortunately, he's still running the most routes, so it's there. I'll buy low on him still, but I'm starting to lose a lot of money betting on Johnson this year. And then Savion Williams is the clear 2 from a route perspective, but just 122 yards. That's 30.5 per game. I'll still bet on Savion though. And then last one, Tay Barber and Darius Davis are starting to run more routes. They're kind of trimming the fat with some of the ancillary pieces here that aren't producing. Last week, Tay Barber, 68% of the routes, Darius Davis, 63. Both were season highs. I think you can now play them a little more confidently. The issue is their prices are still going up, but you want to stack TCU, so play a little bit. Kansas, Jalen Daniels, first bad game of his season against Iowa State. He's averaging 196.5 passing yards per game on 21.5 attempts. Mobility, he's at 335 yards on the ground. He has a ton of designed attempts. 43 of his 53 attempts are on designed runs. So Jalen Daniels is excellent. He's highly involved in the backfield. I don't know what they're going to do at running back. Daniel Highshaw's out. Devin Neal's dealing with the shoulder sprain. He's going to play through it. And Kai Thomas has also been hurt. So do we see this devolve into a four-way committee involving Daniels as well? I think you might see Neal in a full workload, but I think you also might see Neal, Kai Thomas, and Sevion Morrison all split. It's worth taking some shots on Neal's side in particular, but Kai Thomas and Morrison could be more involved as well. We're just flat out not sure right now. I'll take some shots, though. Receiving game, very little consistency here. Target leader, Luke Grimm, 25 targets on the year, 5 targets per game is his average. They just aren't a voluminous passing attack, and they rotate with it, so it makes all these guys difficult to get to. I do think Grimm is fine. If I'm playing one of them, it's still probably Lawrence Arnold. He's 6K. He has the most routes, 4.2 targets per game. Honestly, though, rather than target these receivers, I'm probably just playing cheaper options elsewhere. Purdue, Maryland, 3-point game, fun game. Purdue is extremely pass-heavy. Maryland's a little more balanced this year than last year, but with Purdue and Aiden O'Connell, we know what we're getting. Fast-paced, tons of volume. Maryland's decent on defense, so maybe not the most efficient, but O'Connell's still averaging 300 passing yards per game. He's not mobile, but he's not taking as many sacks this year, so that's positive for O'Connell as well. The backfield is a 3-way committee. King Doru's still out. If he ever returns, it's probably going to a 4-way, but it's like 2 and some change because Kobe Lewis isn't actually that involved. Dylan Downing and Devin Maccabee split. Tough to play either. In the receiving game, Charlie Jones is a straight-up baller. 12.2 targets per game, 117.5 receiving yards. He hasn't seen fewer than 10 targets in any game this year, and he's been banged up in games. He came out of last week's game for a period of time and still finished with 10 targets. This guy has some of the highest upside on any slate just from a raw target perspective. 7K for him still a value. From there, they're using Tyrone Tracy and TJ Sheffield as the other 2 main options. Sheffield's really cheap in particular for 4.8 targets per game. 4,600 is fine. And then Payne Durham. He's quietly averaging 6 targets per game, and he's the second leading receiver on the team, even though he's tight end. I think Durham's fine. Maryland, little slower this year, little run heavier, but still a 53% pass rate. That's hurt Tagovailoa. Last year, he averaged over 300 yards per game. This year, he's at 282.4. Now, still has the upside, but just not as consistent with it. 92 rushing yards. He's not the most mobile, but he's not a 0 either. The receivers are rough. Like Raheem Jarrett's still the wide receiver 1 here, but routes have not been consistent for this team. Jarrett is the one again, but I don't feel great about it, and I don't really want to pay this price tag for him to get like a 65% route share. Now, he zigzagged a little bit, and last week he was up at 83%, but tough for Jarrett. Everybody else is pure timeshare. Jay-Sean Jones, 53%. Corey Dykes, tight end, 58%. Dante Demas, 53%. Cedre Dippre, the tight end, 30%. Jacob Copeland, 49%. Ty Felton, 42%. Man, like Maryland is pure rotation at receiver right now, making them really hard to get to outside of Jarrett. In the backfield, thought Roman Hemby was on his way to a feature back workload, but news to me, they decided to flip their rotation. Antwain Littleton, 23 touches to Roman Hemby's. Let's see here. Roman Hemby still actually finished with 14, but still balanced heavily in favor of Littleton. I don't know what this backfield is going to look like. It's a committee for sure. To what degree one way or the other looks like it's going to be volatile week to week between these guys. But Littleton's 3,600. Take some shots in GPPs. Auburn, Georgia, 30-point total. 30-point spread in favor of Georgia, 49.5 total. Auburn implied below 10 points overall. X out Auburn. Pretty easy. Even Tanks Bigsby, he's in a timeshare with Hunter. Their receivers have been rotating like crazy. Javarius Johnson's the one, but 4,300 arguably is too expensive for him here. Georgia, a mess against Missouri, but I mean, like they kicked a ton of field goals. They start punching some of those in. They're going to be fine. Not the toughest matchup here. Auburn's strength is defense, but we've seen Georgia score on the best of them. Stetson's at a decent price tag here. Last game was alarming for him, but we've seen him average over 300 passing yards per game this year, 42 rushing yards, so he's not giving you zeros on the ground. I think if you want to go back to a contrarian Stetson, that's fine. Their backfield's a 3-way timeshare between Milton, Edwards, and McIntosh. No real consistency there. McIntosh is just flat out too expensive, even though he's the pass game back. The other guys are just dart throws. In the receiving room, Ladd McConkey leads the team in targets, 6.2 per game, but Brock Bowers leads the team with 342 receiving yards. That's just shy of 70 per game. He also gets a couple carries now, which is crazy to say, but Bowers, if you ever want to play him as a contrarian piece at 7K, I think it's fine. But otherwise, it's pure rotation, like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, Darnell Washington at tight end, Kierce Jackson, Dylan Bell, Dominic Blaylock. They all play with no consistency. Like, I don't know how you take these Georgia pass catchers with any confident feelings. If you're playing one of them, like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, 62% of the routes last week, that's okay. Everyone else outside of Darnell Washington below 50%. So maybe a flyer on Rosemy-Jacksaint, but don't love it. He did have 8 targets. That's good, but tough to get to Georgia pass catchers. Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, 9-point spread in favor of Oklahoma State. 70 total here. We're going to get to this game. Both teams top 10 in seconds per play. Really pass heavy on both sides. Donovan Smith has been solid. He's averaging 295 yards per game. 93 rush yards cumulatively. That's good for Donovan. Backfield is a mess. It's a committee between Taj and Saradrick. Not too interested. And my goodness, these air raid teams consolidate your receivers even slightly and will play you guys. But like Texas Tech, they're a complete disaster. Now, Miles Price got hurt. If he's healthy, he's the clear number one. If he plays, I would just try to get to Miles Price at 5,500. But like Jaron Bradley, he went from 90% of the routes to 69% of the routes to 63. Last week, he didn't even get a target. And then, like Louis Fungi, 31% of the routes down to 7%, back up to 53. Taj Brooks, 46% to 32 to 22. Like Trey Cleveland, he went from 52% down to 20, back up to 79. JJ Sparkman touted him as maybe a min-price option after he ran 73% of the routes. Well, last week he dropped back down to 31%. There's no rhyme or reason to this rotation. It's entirely whimsical. Play Miles Price or throw a dart. I mean, I don't know what to do at this point. I'm done playing these guys in low-risk contest cash games. There's just better options than rolling the dice on JJ Sparkman type receiver who goes from 70% of the routes down to 30. Oklahoma State, Spencer Sanders has been excellent this year. He has 185 rushing yards. He's averaging 273 through the air, which is much better than anything he's ever put on the field in his career. They're extremely fast and pass heavier than normal too. They're also easy to stack. Braden Johnson, he's solid at 5,600. He averages 7.8 targets per game, 90 receiving yards. Bryson Green's averaging 4.3 targets per game. He's technically the wide receiver 2 in terms of routes, but Brandon Presley's been a little more involved. He has 6.3 targets per game, 63 yards. He's 5,100. I prefer Johnson straight up. And then John Paul Richardson's like the wide receiver 4, technically, 18 targets for him. I would rather play Bryson Green, but all 4 of these top receiving options are firmly in play. At running back, Dominique Richardson's been a monster. 28 touches last week. They put a cupcake in between, but then against Arizona State, he had 33 touches. Like, this guy has 30 touch upside. It's the full Jalen Warren workload. Not the most efficient, but you can bank on him touching the ball a ton here, and they're 9-point favorites. I'll be playing some Richardson. He's the reason why I'm not super interested in the Bijan Robinsons of the world. And that was the same thing with Ibrahim last week. Like, why am I locking in 26 Bijan Robinson touchdowns when I can play 30 Dominique Richardson for 2K less? I mean, if you can play them both, great. But I mean, this is just general strategy that I'm following most of the time. It's going to be slate dependent. So not a tried and true reason, but always something to consider. Utah, UCLA, 64.5 total, 4-point spread in favor of Utah. Rising's been excellent. He's just not the most involved. 229 passing yards per game on 27.5 attempts. Not great there. He's also not like the most mobile. He's not even as active as like DTR on the other side. 189 yards for Cam Rising. When he's coaxed into game scripts that make him pass, he's solid there, though. Just tougher to stack now that he lost Brant Keithy. Devon Vele, 6.2 targets per game. He's a little rich for my liking at 7,400. I'd rather play Dalton Kincaid, 4.4K. He's averaging 5 targets per game. Theoretically, you'd think that would rise just because he plays the same position as Keithy, and Keithy vacated a massive role. Actually, Kincaid is second on the team in yards, which is solid here. The backfield's devolved into a complete timeshare. Tavion Thomas, he was in the doghouse. I believe he's suspended for a half of the game. Gave Jalen Glover the full workload for part of the game. He was relatively inefficient. And then Micah Bernard's their pass game back. Last week, all 3 had 6 carries. Micah Bernard led the way with 4 targets, which separated him from the group and makes him probably the best play, but it's a timeshare right now, and it is gross. UCLA. DTR, game of maybe his life last week. The guy has 223 rush yards. He's averaging 241 through the air. It's the best season I've ever seen out of DTR. With his high total game, DTR is always going to be in play. He's easy to stack too. You got Jake Bobo, 6,500. He had 9 targets last week. Casimir Allen, he's technically the leader in targets, 27. But we're seeing a little bit of a changing of the guard. Cam Brown came back from injury. Saw 5 targets last week. I'm expecting more things from Cam Brown moving forward. At 3,500, he's a guy to look at there. And then in the backfield, Charbonnet, super involved. Last week, he touched the ball 26 times. He has a great pass game role, over 22 carries. The reason his workload's not as great as it has been in the past is injury. Like they just didn't run him out there for a full workload against teams like Bowling Green, nor should they. If he's banged up, get him right, play him in your big conference games, which looks like they'll do here. Wisconsin Northwestern, not Washington. Saw the UW on the bottom. Got ahead of myself there, but we got Wisconsin Northwestern. This game is as close to an X out spot as you can get. Wisconsin 10-point favorite, 44 total here. I mean, they just fired their head coach. Graham Mertz is atrocious. Easy to fade the pass game. Easy to fade all the receivers. Jameer Dike, 9 targets last week, averages 5 per game. You're just going to do better than him at 5K. Skylar Bell leads the team in routes. You're just going to do better than him at 4.4K. They lost their tight end, Clay Cundiff. Don't know if Jack Eschenbach is going to be the leader there or if they're going to rotate. Easy enough. Braylon Allen, we saw them get absolutely trucked. But, I mean, the timeshare with Braylon Allen continues. There's absolutely no reason Ches Malushi should be carrying the ball 7 times when Allen gets 8. You're just taking on so much risk with Allen at this price. I mean, they have not shown the same commitment to him that even they showed last year. So I don't know what they're doing. It's expensive, but you want to play contrarian Braylon Allen. He's arguably the best running back talent-wise on the slate, but no consistent volume. Northwestern's a mess. They're actually playing fast this year and pass at a 56% pass rate, but Helinski's so bad. Tough to play him. 287 yards per game. He's negative in terms of rushing, so he needs a bonus, and this is a tough defense. The receivers are playable. There are some cheap guys you could get to. Malik Washington, 9.8 targets per game. Donnie Navarro, 8.6. Even Evan Hall, I mean, we'll talk about him in a second. 7.4 targets per game for running back Evan Hall. That's crazy. But overall, Navarro and Malik Washington are cheap enough to maybe look at. Then Evan Hall, holy smokes. 7.4 targets per game for Hall. He's averaging 26.5 touches. 6.3K for Hall, go ahead. He's fine. The volume is enough for Evan Hall to pay off this tag, even as a 10-point underdog against a good defense. Ohio State, Michigan State. 27-point spread in favor of Ohio State. 65 total. Last week, they just took the ball out of the air, slammed it on the ground with Mayan Williams, and they can do that. It was, I think, positive to see if you're holding any Ohio State tickets. Stroud averages 275 yards per game. If you give him full run out like they normally do with the 50% pass rate we saw from last year, he's over 300 yards, bonusing. Jackson Smith and Jigba might play in this game finally. He's the wide receiver 1 when healthy, which we haven't seen in some time now. I don't know if he's going to be limited or what they're going to do with him, but I would expect him to slowly ramp up soon here. Always playable at the price. He should be a GPP option. But without him, they've used Emeka Ibuka and Marvin Harrison as the top 2 guys. Sorry, Emeka, I always struggle with your name, and I apologize. But they've been running the most routes here. Outside of that, Julian Fleming has been technically the wide receiver 3. It's a bit of a rotation at that position. I'm just trying to get to either Ibuka or Harrison and Smith and Jigba if he plays. And then tight end is Cade Stover, 70+% route rate in each of the last 2, 3 of the last 4. Not the most involved in the pass game, but he's out there a fair amount, 4K flat for cheap attachments to the offense. Fine. Trevion Williams, he's supposed to come back here. Interestingly, Mayan has been awesome in his absence. Mayan's averaging nearly 100 yards per game, decent pass catcher. But when Trevion comes back, they've given him the green light over Mayan a couple times. Even 2 weeks ago, 21 carries for Henderson, 11 for Mayan Williams. This should probably be a 50-50 committee based on the efficiency of Williams, but I don't have any confidence in one way or the other. Still worth taking shots. Ohio State has a 46 team total. They're going to crush Michigan State here. Michigan State does not play any defense. On the other side, Michigan State, 19 total, not great. Thorne only averaging 224.5 yards through the air, 45 cumulative yards on the ground. You could just find better options than him. Jalen Berger, increasingly in a timeshare, not just with Broussard, but Elijah Collins has played better than them both. This is just devolving quickly. Then in the receiving game, Jaden Reed outplayed by Keen Coleman. Again, it's continual now. For the first time this year, Reed did out-target Keen Coleman 12-8, but these 2 are the most involved. They're the only 2 I'm even saying are worth targeting here. Everybody else is locked into a timeshare for Michigan State behind them. It's pretty rough sledding for the Spartans right now this year. People calling for Mel Tucker's head. Don't think it happens, but Playing a third guy is probably Trey Mosley, 69% route rate last week. Still rough. I'd rather just play Coleman or Reed. Ole Miss, Vandy, 17-point spread, 62 total. Ole Miss just shy of 40 points in terms of implied total. They're very fast. They're very run heavy. Dart has not gotten a full workload in most of the games this year. He's now starting to. They are not using Altmaier. Dart won the job, so 241 rushing yards. Dart is excellent on the ground, 182 yards per game through the air. He's going to see better days, just in more competitive spots and games where he plays the full allotment of snaps. Dart is a contrarian option in tournaments, nothing more. In the backfield, Zach Evans still dealing with that hip pointer. We've now seen him out-carried in 3 straight games by freshman Quinson Judkins, who's been amazing. This guy is not gone, and Evans is not taking over the backfield at any point in time with Judkins there. Judkins is averaging 107 rushing yards per game. He's touching the ball 17 and a half times. The dude is sick, and he's cheaper than Evans. I prefer him to Evans straight up 1-for-1, even at the same price. But Evans, he could be used in tournaments. Bentley's still hurt right now. It doesn't look like Ulysses Bentley's going to play. In the receiving room, we've seen this shift a little bit here, and I want to bring you to the routes because Michael Trigg saw his routes drop to 34%. I'm not sure if this is an injury or whatever, but Casey Kelly, 56% of the routes. That's a big increase for him. At receiver, they played 3 guys. It was Malik Heath, Jonathan Mingo, Jordan Watkins. The route rates, Malik Heath, 84%, Jonathan Mingo, 97%, Jordan Watkins, 78%. Jalen Robinson, in the return from injury, he was not targeted in the game. So could be an injury thing, could be on the outside looking in. I'm going to just play Jordan Watkins if I'm getting to a cheap guy here, but I prefer Mingo as the top option here. But Watkins, a lot of routes for 3,500 and the high-powered offense. We'll take some of that. Vandy, really low total here, but AJ Swan's now playing ahead of Mike Wright. He's pure pocket passer, not targetable himself. He's got negative rushing yards in the year, but he does produce a lot of volume for his pass catchers. Will Shepard and Jaden Mcgowan. Shepard averages 8.8 targets per game. Mcgowan averages 6.0. Shepard leads the team in yardage at 365. McGowan's at 274. I would just rather play Shepard at a cheaper price right now. I think it makes sense to me. They're projected to get back Quincy Skinner. That probably makes like Devin Bodie, Quincy Skinner, like these guys timeshare, but we'll see. Tight end is a timeshare as well. So that's really where I'm stopping here. The running backs are becoming an increasingly more timeshare dependent situation. Ray Davis was the bell cow, but we now saw the return of both Rocco Griffin and Patrick Smith. I think it's a timeshare moving forward. Just the contrarian pass catcher for Vandy for me. And final game, the real UW, Washington takes on Arizona State. Excuse me for my lapse first time through. 13.5 point spread in favor of Washington, 56.5 total. Fast game for the most part, more so on the Washington side. Arizona is a little below average in pace, actually, but good passing game, mostly because Washington wants to and Arizona State's been losing games. Penix, 346.5 passing yards per game, 25 total rushing yards. He's got a voluminous role, and he has upside when he's targeting these pass catchers. The 3 receivers are Jalen McMillan, Rome O'Dunes, and Jalen Polk. O'Dunes is the leader on a target basis per game-wise, but McMillan leads on the season. They're both fine. Jalen Polk is your cheap option if you're getting one. He's just averaging 54 yards per game, 4.8 targets, but Jalen Polk has taken over some of the other backs in terms of role. I think he's completely fine. His routes were still at 87% last week. Backfield's a timeshare. Wayne Talapapa leads, but I don't have any confidence in this. I would tentatively lean Talapapa's direction, but I think there's better options in this range like Judkins and such. Arizona State, we've got Emory Jones. He's not running, or when he does, it's offset by sack yardage, so he's just 7 yards on the year. Just flat out not going to cut it at his price for this level of rushing ability. Xavier Valladay still has a very clear role. He's ahead of Daniel Nada, but unfortunately for Valladay, 15 touches last week. Nada came in at 7, so it's getting closer and it's inefficient, but Valladay maybe in tournaments. Last, we'll bring up the routes for Arizona State because, man, this team is brutal in terms of their pass game. But if for whatever reason you want to be contrarian and target one of these guys, we've got you covered here. Last week, route leaders, Elijah Badger, 68%, Giovanni Sanders, 63%, Andre Johnson, 46%, Messias Winston, their tight end, 41%, Jalen Connors, other tight end, was at 34%, Charles Hall, 34%, Brian Thompson, 51%. You probably get the point. Nobody has a clear role in this game for Arizona State. But that's all of our games. Let me know in the comment section what you think. If we missed anything, if there's a situation you want more clarity on, whatever it may be, if you have a question, a comment, leave it, and I'll make sure to get back to you. If you'd like to reach out, I'm available on Twitter at Matt_Kajeski. More than happy to help you there. Thank you to our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook and Prize Picks, the main sponsor of the channel. Prize Picks for sponsoring the video. Appreciate you guys. But until next time, we will see you guys again next week. Good luck, and we'll see you then.